Good evening, everyone. I'm delighted to welcome you all to our program this evening. I hope you are all staying safe and dry. We're very, very excited to have you part of this program entitled The Fight for Decarceration. This program is part of our Emroch Speaker Series. The series was created by Mr. Emroch and his wife, Bertha, and continues to be supported by his son, Walter, and daughter-in-law, Karen. Emmanuel Emroch was a 1931 graduate of the law school and had a very distinguished career as a trial lawyer. He was a founder and past president of the Richmond and Virginia Trial Lawyers Association and a member of the National Academy of Trial Lawyers. But Mr. Emroch was much more than a terrific lawyer. He was founder of the Richmond chapter of the National Conference of Christians and Jews and was chair of the committee that successfully secured enactment of Virginia's anti-discriminatory advertising law. In 1974, he was honored by the NCCJ with that organization's humanitarian award. Given Mr. Emroch's record, our panel of speakers today is particularly appropriate. We are honored to welcome MiAngel Cody, Edward Douglas, and Latonja Walker. I'd like to turn things over to the president of our Criminal Law Society, Karina Idem, to introduce our panel. Take it away, Karina.
Thank you so much, Team Purdue, and thank you everyone for joining us tonight, and big thank you to our speakers. First, we have MiAngel Cody, who is a lawyer that has been nationally recognized for her dedicated defense of men and women sentenced to life in prison. She's the founder of the Decarceration Collective, a Chicago-based legal firm that has defended hundreds of people in federal court and has won freedom for over 40 life sentence prisoners. She's also a writer and producer, and among other projects, she produced The Third Strike, a documentary and digital storytelling platform for life sentence drug offenders in America. We also have with us tonight Edward Douglas, a client of Ms. Cody, who received a mandatory federal life sentence for selling 140 grams of crack. After 14 years in federal prison, he was released from a life sentence in 2019. He is now a coach for a community softball league that offers mentorship to young Chicago residents, and he is featured as the main character in the Third Strike documentary. We also have with us Latonja Walker, who has worked as a correctional officer in county, state, and federal prisons in South Carolina for more than 20 years. She also serves as a consultant for correctional facilities, and she is a criminal justice advocate. She serves on the board for the South Carolina chapter of the National Association of Blacks in Criminal Justice, as well as the South Carolina Alternative to Violence Project. And last but not least, we have our moderator, Julie McConnell, who is the director of the Children's Defense Clinic here at Richmond. Through the clinic, she and her students represent on a pro bono basis indigent youth throughout Central Virginia who are charged with acts of delinquency. In addition to the clinic, she teaches advanced clinical practice and juvenile delinquency law and procedure. And with that, I'll turn it over to Professor McConnell.
Thank you so much, Karina. Welcome, everyone. We are really looking forward to having a robust conversation with you all tonight about the criminal legal system. And we thought it might be helpful to kick things off with a wonderful recording of the moment when Ms. Cody was able to tell one of her clients that he was finally going to go home. He was the first individual to receive relief under the First Step Act, and we're going to play the call where she gave him that news. After that, we're going to show a brief segment from the documentary Third Strike, which tells us about the incredible Decarceration Collective that Ms. Cody started, that is an all-female law firm that has helped over 43 people gain their freedom who are serving extremely lengthy sentences because of the mandatory minimum systems and three strikes laws that we're all familiar with on nonviolent drug offenses. They're doing incredible work. This documentary is extraordinary. It's going to be made available to all of us on Apple in March. And because of your involvement in tonight's event, you'll get an opportunity to get an early preview of that documentary. But tonight we're going to show you a brief clip. And with that, I'll turn it over to Carl.
Hello.
Hi, Mr. Douglas. How are you? The judge is going to have you be present to participate in a hearing today. It's going to happen by phone.
Okay. Okay.
And that you should be immediately released. as much time as you need.
Yeah, I'll be glad to see my mom and my kids.
Yeah.
Thank you. Oh.
Yeah, thank you. You know, it's a privilege. This is an honor for us to be able to walk with you, to flank you, to protect you, to stand with you. This is our privilege.
Right, and we're not through.
No.
At the age of 24, Alton Mills was given a mandatory life sentence without parole for a low-level, nonviolent drug offense. When Alton Mills stepped into that federal prison cell with a life sentence, he was stepping into a jail cell for the first time in his life, and he was bound to stay there for the rest of his life.
I just say, how he gonna get life? He ain't murder no one. People that murder.
Allow them as individuals to petition so that their sentences could be considered. That's something you've opposed. So in fairness, tell me why you still oppose that.
The justice system as it stands now is biased against the poor, against drug addicted, and against people of color.
Every prison I go to, I ask wardens, these are the people in charge. I always say to them, are there people that don't belong here? And they go, yeah. There are people that this should not be here.
I've been around rapists, murderers, and they had less time than me.
I think America has to prioritize and invest our money into people.
I feel blessed. I had a team of ladies that fought for me.
We always told ourselves our mission was to be the best lawyers that money could not buy.
When I was in the streets, I was fighting and doing everything, and guys was always around. And then it took a...
That's what people learn from this, is like, you have to want it. Like, we would scratch concrete until you were out.
I want to get married one day, and like every girl, she wants her father to walk her down the aisle. Am I willing to wait on my father? Yes, I am willing to do that. I will do that because I have faith and I believe that he'll get out.
I'm proud to stand here with Edward Douglas, and you are the first person to be liberated thanks to the First Step Act. To me, you represent what's possible and what has to happen, right?
I'ma keep on running.
MiAngel, I cannot wait to see the rest of this documentary. It's extraordinary, I can tell, and it's such an amazing story, what you've been able to do with the Decarceration Collective. Could you just tell us a little bit about how it started and what the purpose is behind the collective?
Yeah, absolutely. So I started out doing indigent defense work. This was even before I went to law school. I was a capital investigator going to visit men on death row in Louisiana. And I always was interested in, like the human story behind the cases, right? Who is that person? What's their story? Where they come from? Who's their family? What makes people do the things that they do? And so I thought I was going to be an organizer, an activist. That turned into a legal career. And for many years, I was a federal defender in Chicago, picking up whatever came in on my duty day. If you're a bank robber or you're charged with fraud, if you were arrested on my duty day and the FBI took you into custody, then I would represent you at no cost. And so I think that really was the seed that made me understand the importance of representing people free of charge, especially when people's life or liberty is at stake. And while I was a federal defender, I got a case. It was a young guy who was 19 at the time. It was his first drug offense. He got mandatory life without parole. He had been in for 23 years, and a childhood friend called. And, I was on duty and asked me to look into the case, and I just knew that she had the facts wrong, right? Because when you hear those facts, you think, there's no way, right, that the person can get mandatory life as a 19-year-old for a first-time drug offense in the feds.
Yeah.
And I, said, oh, I'll call you back. I put his name on a Post-it note. It sat there for a week. And I started researching, and it turned out like absolutely he had gotten mandatory life under some of, our most draconian federal drug sentences. I wrote a clemency petition, long story short, to President Obama, who had never granted a clemency before, and waited a year, sent it into the Department of Justice, waited a year, and got a call from the White House that it had been granted a year later. And I was like, as you know, Professor McConnell, when you win a case, then suddenly you think you can win all the cases.
Yes.
And so I was like,
I think you have been.
Right. I mean, I'm like, this is my career. And so I now exclusively focus on representing people serving life in prison for drugs. But it all started from that Post-it note, that like suspension of disbelief, and just a commitment to telling people stories. So I started the Decarceration Collective to just do that, to represent people at no charge who are buried alive. And from the podium to policy, we are working. I also just love working with very fierce women. And so we're also an incubator for that talent as well.
It's really terrific. I see Mr. Douglas has joined us, and you represented Mr. Douglas under a First Step Act petition, and he was the first person to get relief under the First Step Act. Is that correct?
He was. I think he's muted, but if he unmutes himself, he can sort of talk about that. But yeah, so I found Mr. Douglas's case just on Westlaw. And, because I'm always looking for like, who's out there, who's serving life. So I'm like looking on Westlaw for cases, and I see this case out of the, Central District of Illinois, which is not my district where I was practicing in Chicago. So I called his mother because I found where she had written a letter to the judge years after he had been sentenced to life. And she was just like heartbroken. And the judge told her there's nothing that he could do, even though he wanted to do something to go below the mandatory minimum set by Congress. So I called his mother and said, I would love to represent your son. I'm going to set up an attorney call with him, but I wanted to just call and speak with you and let you know that, all my compassion, my team's heart goes out to you. He'd been in prison for, I think, almost 13 years at that point.
So it's my understanding that he had 2 prior marijuana-related offenses, and then this crime, which was selling a fistful of crack to an informant, a confidential informant. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I think, I know we got a lot of law students here, so they probably already know this, but, when I look at a case, I think about, what are the 3 aims of punishment, right, in criminal law? Retribution, safety, incapacitation. And so, I read the appeal in his case, and I'm like, how do we get to a mandatory life sentence for 140 grams of crack? And for people who don't know, 140 grams is like the size of a golf ball, right? Like you can put it in your fist. And so how do we get there? Not just in his case, but in like the development of the law, where the people have said for that golf ball of crack, you must forfeit the entire balance of your freedom. And it was under this 3 strikes drug law under the federal statute that if you have 2 prior drug convictions, even if they're state priors, even if those prior strikes, you only got probation, right? So in Mr. Douglas's case, his first prior was 1989. It was possession of marijuana. And his second prior was for, a personal use amount of cocaine in the 90s. But those were 2 strikes. And he then was ensnared by this cooperator, which I'll talk about in a second, who was wearing a wire, set him up, was accused of selling a golf ball of crack, and got mandatory life. No priors for violence. And so I read that and it didn't make sense to me. I like to take cases and talk to people about prisoners whose cases don't make sense, because I think if we have a robust conversation, then we all sort of think about, wait, this is policy, and this is what's happening in our names. So that's sort of how I found his case. And for me, what was so compelling about it, he was working at the time. Like Mr. Douglas worked for the city of Chicago, for the Chicago Transit Authority. He was out on bond for his trial, like showing up to court every day, didn't flee, and facing a mandatory life sentence without parole. And so after he was convicted, he just self-surrendered to this life sentence, right? So, I just think if people, put themselves in the position of like standing before a federal judge at a podium, self-surrendering to a life sentence, and what that must have felt like.
I can't even imagine what that must have felt like, Mr. Douglas. Do you want to share a little bit of that with us?
I still can't imagine how it felt, just sitting there. But what I was thinking about is my family and my kids. When he told me that I had the life sentence, and I told him that I'll be back, because there's no way that I said that I should be doing a life sentence. And I'm not saying that if you don't do, you do some crime, you shouldn't, get some time. But to give a person a life sentence that, I haven't killed anyone or raped anyone, that's not me, and they getting off scot-free 5-10 years, so, and that's why I do what I do now, especially with these lovely ladies, I can't even speak about them. I just get so wound up because they are some beautiful women, and they take these cases pro bono, so it's genuine what they doing and what they doing to help us, so like I said, just to sit there, just for him to tell me I got a life sentence, and looking at my mother and my friends, my family in courtroom crying, I just couldn't cry, until I got back into the bullpen. But I told them, hey, it's going to be all right. And 16 years later, I'm home with the help of the whole collection, the beautiful ladies, and when I got that call, I just lost it, knowing I'm going back home to my family, and just to, I left a lot of great people in jail that I communicate with right now, try to assist them in whatever way that I can, so they call me, and, I just sent, I kid you not, I got a paper receipt right now. I just sent a gentleman some money, because I've been on that other side and I know how it is. So anything that I could do to assist them or help them, I'm here, and one thing about it, I just go to work, I go play ball, I run the team, I stay away from just any and everything. If it ain't about ball and my family and work, I don't deal with it, because ain't no way that I would ever let my mother, my kids, my grandkids down. If I go to jail, it'll be to see someone.
Yes.
So.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
And it's incredible to see that you're still giving back, that you're still trying to help people you left behind. You're trying to help people in your community, being the commissioner of the softball league.
Yes.
It's extraordinary.
Yes, because I could hurt family, because now, being my daughters and my sons, we got a bond, that can't be broken. And it took a minute, to, figure it out, but we figuring it out. So I'm thankful, and I'm thankful for Richmond from even listening to our stories and trying, I appreciate you ladies and gentlemen that's put this together.
Well, there are many students watching tonight who are really interested in hearing your story and so glad that you're succeeding. So congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. It's not fun. It's not fun, especially when the person that did it to you, you know, I'm talking about he went to jail for murders and etc. And he ended up getting like 5-6 years because he, you know, became a rat, as you want to say. So, you know, for me to get the life sentence and they want to bury me in jail, you know, it's not right. And like I say, I'm not gonna never say that if you do something, you should be penalized for it because, you know, you're breaking the law, but it depends on what you did in the situation. Just to throw away the key on somebody because they wouldn't tell, that's wrong, you know. And like I say, I got a lot of, you know, stuff going on that, you know, with teenagers and older gentlemen too, you know, to straight them the right way, you know, because I can relate to them from both sides of the aisle, from being in jail and not being in jail, you know. So
yes,
for you ladies and gentlemen in law, you know, just try to help, you know, listen to the people, you know, when they tell you something, because you know, the majority of, you know, we did our thing, you know, but just like I say, to get the time that we get is unfair.
And thank goodness there is the Decarceration Collective to help in situations like this.
Yes.
Can you tell us, Ms. Cody, a little bit about the First Step Act and how you were able to use it to win freedom for Mr. Douglas?
Absolutely. So the First Step Act was the most recent law that was passed under a 3-step, you know, chapter in the story to roll back some of the harsh penalties that we saw passed starting in the 1980s to punish crack offenses, right? So in the 1980s, we had the Controlled Substances Act, the Anti-Drug Abuse Act, those were passed, that instituted very harsh mandatory minimums for drug offenses and also abolished federal parole. That's very important. A lot of people don't know that there's no such thing as parole in the federal system.
And in most state systems.
Exactly. Like here in Florida, we don't have parole. And so what we saw then was sort of an explosion of the prison population in America using some of these new mandatory minimum, harsh crack penalties, and people were sentenced there and they're staying there longer because there's no parole. We know that the Supreme Court has said in United States versus Kimbrough that there's no distinction between crack and powder cocaine. They're chemically the same substance. And so what we saw was it's like punishing icicles 18 or 100 times harsher than punishing snow, like powder. They're the same substance. They're all water, right? They're chemically the same. And so once the Supreme Court says that there's no distinction, then we started seeing where Congress, there was some appetite to roll back some of the harsh penalties from the 1980s and 90s. That happened in 2010 with the Fair Sentencing Act. It reduced the disparity. It didn't eliminate it, and that was a political compromise. What we often see with drug policy is that a good law will happen, but it will only help the people who are coming into court after it's passed, right? So it'll be prospective. And so if Mr. Douglas was standing before the judge in 2010 after that law passed, he wouldn't have faced such a harsh sentence, but he was already in prison, right? And so the First Step Act took those advancements under prior laws and made them retroactive. It allowed us to go back into court and to knock on the courthouse doors for people who are already in prison. So what you'll see as you're reading some of these cases is you might see some positive step in drug policy that is not retroactive. Then advocates like me have to go and advocate for lawmakers to also make it retroactive, to go back and help people who are currently buried. Otherwise, we're leaving people, you know, fossilized in a system that was previously unfair, and, you know, serving life today under yesterday's old drug laws. So I think that the First Step Act, it certainly was a vehicle to get back into court. as law students and, you know, tomorrow's lawyers, you're always going to be trying to figure out what's my vehicle, right? Like, I know what I'm going to say when I get to the podium, but what's my vehicle to drive there and to get into court? Because a lot of times you'll get bounced out if you drive with the wrong vehicle. And so the First Step Act is a vehicle for justice. It's a vehicle to get us back in the court.
It is a vehicle, and there are some other things that are being proposed to transform the criminal legal system. Are there certain things that you think would make a big difference beyond the First Step Act?
Absolutely. One of the things that the First Step Act did is it allowed us to go back into court for people sentenced to life in prison for crack. But what it didn't do is allow us to go back into court for people serving life sentences for marijuana, right? And so Mr. Douglas left behind in prison people who were serving life for marijuana, which we know, you know, is becoming legal in many states. And there are many people who are setting up industries, right? And so what I would like to see is marijuana justice prospectively and retroactively become an actual and real conversation in this country. I want to see the disparity between crack and powder today is 18-1. You know, we're in political compromise land. But we know that 2 weeks ago, Senators Durbin and Senator Booker introduced what's called the Equal Act, and it would eliminate the disparity so that, you know, if you have a golf ball of crack, it's the same, you're facing the same punishment as a golf ball of powder. And so I think that makes common sense. Like, that's common sense sentencing policy in America.
Thank you. Thank you. Ms. Walker, I want to bring you into our conversation, and you're muted. So you have worked in local, state, and federal correctional facilities, and you've now started your own consulting business to help change the way correctional officers are trained. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing with your consulting business and why?
I think you may have muted.
Well, there she is. There she is.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Definitely, I want to say thank you to the University of Richmond also for having me on, to Ms. Cody. Thank you for your work. Your work is beautiful. We appreciate it. But definitely one of the things I'm trying to do in corrections, being in the inside and being in corrections for 25 years, I've actually worked at 8 different facilities in South Carolina. That's county, state, and federal corrections, and then partial juvenile. One of the things I'm trying to do, a couple of years ago when they had the Democratic convention here in Columbia, I met a young lady who was actually a part of one of the panels I was a part of during the Democratic convention. And so we ended up talking after the panel was over, and she asked me one thing. She said, you know what? She said, you guys are inside to be healers and not hurters. And she grabbed my hand and told me to start healing. So I can definitely say that pretty much changed some of the dynamics. I've been doing this, you know, like I said, for 25 years, but my goal being in the inside is to actually help and listen, not only understand from the offender side, but also from the staff side. As one thing that I try to do on a daily basis, just to see how they're doing, what they're going through. Like I tell the staff on any given day, it's okay, you know, to ask the offender, you know, how are you? How are your family? Okay, have you been programming? What are you doing? So that's one of my basic goals daily within the facility, to make sure that they are okay. I tell them a lot of times, I can't change that you're here, the fact that you're here, but I can help you as much as I can by policy and procedure, you know, to make it through the next day, and we'll keep going until we both get it figured out. So that's what I try to do daily within the prison system.
And you've had some personal experiences in your own family with people being on the inside, is that right?
Yeah.
Could I just interrupt? Could I just interrupt for 1 sec? Latonja, could you please? Oh, thank you so much.
Hi.
Welcome.
I was sharing with Ms. McConnell on Tuesday when I got to speak with her that a lot of people do not, I think on this side of where I am, may not like to share what go on in their family, but there was a time that incarceration did plague my family too. And I told her about the program that I designed, which is called Mindset, Choose Better Now. And it was 3 components that actually made me design that program. The first component was my brother. I come from a very, very religious family. I have 8 ordained ministers in my family who all have their own churches. And my brother was on crack cocaine for 20 years. It actually drove my family crazy. You know, it wasn't enough prayer, enough anything during that time to help my brother, to heal my brother. So I was explaining to Ms. McConnell some of the things that we went through with him during that time, that's in and out of substance abuse clinics, staying in clinics or outpatient clinics. So this particular day, he was with me in Rock Hill, South Carolina at that time. And I was with him. I was in my day off and I had took him to one of his outpatient clinics. So we had came home and got a call from his oldest daughter, my niece. And she was calling. She was a freshman at South Carolina State. And she was like, Dad, I need $100. I need $100 to get the rest of my book. So he was like, okay, babe, you know, I'll call you back. We'll get it to you. So my brother hung up the phone. And when he hung up the phone, he started crying. So I asked him what was going on. He was like, sis, I doped away so much in my life for 20 years. He said, I can't even give my daughter $100, you know, to get her books. He said, it makes me feel bad. It makes me feel so bad that I can't even help her to get her books. And this is her first year. So we came up with it, you know, gave it to her. But my brother now, he ended up in Winston-Salem. He's in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, as we speak. He's been there for 5 years. He has been drug-free since October the 1st of last year. So it's been 5 years. So the particular program that my brother went into, they offered him different programs that he could do. He went to NAAA every day just for himself. So he ended up in a particular substance abuse house in Winston-Salem. And now my brother's a director. It's been 5 years later. And now he's the director over that same house that he started in 5 years ago. And he's doing well. And this year he's having 4 grandchildren, 3 of his children. You know, one of my nieces is actually having twins. So he has 4 grandchildren on the way this year. So he's doing well.
So glad to hear that.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad you were able to stick by him all those years.
Yes, definitely.
You told me about an experience that you had in the kitchen one day at one of the correctional facilities where you work that really changed your mindset about, you know, the way that prison can both dehumanize the people that are incarcerated there as well as the staff that work with them. You want to share that with us?
That's true. In 2017, I had an experience with a lifer. During that time, I was a cook supervisor and I saw one of the guys stealing from the serving line. And he was just stuffing food in his coat. So by this time I went and I took his coat from him. So me and him ended up face to face, you know, you're going to give me my coat back. And, you know, so I'm telling him, no, I'm not. So the staff on the other end of the cafeteria saw us face to face, but I didn't know I had the lifer behind me. So when the staff came and got the offender from the line, I'm going back to the office. I mean, I'm steaming, you know, I'm angry, I'm steaming, you know, so I go to the office. So when I sit down in the office, the lifer literally came up to the desk and he put his hands on my desk and he looked at me. He said, Ms. Walker, he said, now, you know, that really looked bad. Okay, that really, really looked bad. Number one, there was probably food you guys was getting ready to throw away. He was probably getting it to take it to other guys in the unit because a lot of guys here don't get money. He said, but that looked bad. He said, Ms. Walker, you need to work on your anger. He said, don't get me wrong. We love working with you in this kitchen. You're a good lady to work for. We don't mind. Some of us will probably go to lockup for you. But why should we when you need to work on you? So you need to work on that. All right. Work on your anger, Ms. Walker. That's all I got to say. He ended up getting out, I think 2 years ago on the First Step Act. He did end up getting released. He had a life sentence and he ended up getting released, I think in 2018 or 2019, but that actually changed the dynamics of the way I thought, because if that had turned ugly, he could have severely assaulted me because we were just that close, and he could have severely assaulted me that day in the kitchen if the staff hadn't got there in time. So that really made me change the dynamics of the way I was thinking, but also work on me. That's why I have the de-escalation program, Just Breathe, and other things I'm working on creating now, that if we just take time just to breathe, you know, as staff, some days is better than others for us, but if we just take the time to breathe, communication, that's one thing they teach us, and all the training academies I had went to, is that 90%, you know, of what we do is communication. 10%, 15% may be writing, but 90% is communication. So I started with the National Association of Blacks in Criminal Justice. I'm also a facilitator with the South Carolina Alternative Violence Program. yoga, other things that pretty much helped me during that time. Toastmasters. I'm also the secretary for one of the chapters here for Toastmasters. So since 2017, I've been rebuilding me to be a better staff member inside.
And how receptive are the other folks who work inside corrections to the ideas that you have?
I have good and bad receptions with that because people are people. We are who we are. A lot of people know that I am a public speaker at times. So every now and then I'll get pulled at the institution to speak. Currently, I am a diversity and inclusion management instructor. I just got that last year. So a lot of people are working on it. They're warming up to it. But most of what I do is community and outreach. And so if they need me at the institution, I'll do what I can there. But my main thing is mostly community outreach because, surprisingly enough, a lot of people may not even understand that there are 3 or 4 different dynamics of corrections. When I go public speak, be it churches or other events here, I tell them that it's 3 components to corrections. When people automatically hear jail or prison, it's just jail or prison. I told them, no, you have county, you have state, you have federal, and I also tell them about, juveniles, so it's actually fun. So the people at the job, they have their ways, but I'm mostly outreach in community. That's my thing.
So in a perfect world, I think we would focus on re-entry from the moment that people enter into the prison. And I know that's something you've worked on a lot. What are your thoughts about having re-entry be the goal from day one of incarceration?
Wow. I'm always getting little tidbits from the guys in prison because we can sit down and talk. And I had a powerful thing that was said to me back in 2018, besides my other my other situation. One of the offenders had asked me, he said, Ms. Walker, do you know the toughest time, for us, during corrections and, trying to get out? And I'm like, no. He said, the last 6 weeks of us going home is actually the toughest time. Because you don't know, if you haven't got your business straight while you're in here, like a lot of these guys sit and they look at TV and they're not trying to call home and they're not trying to get a job. He said the last 6 weeks is probably the toughest time, of our sentence. Because if we haven't got ourselves together while we're in here, it's a totally different world out there now. So re-entry to me, that one of the biggest parts that I try to do, I never try to get myself in a conversation.
Oh, you're muted.
We're inside. I can't help them as a counselor. I am allowed to give them references. I tell the guys all the time, hey, if you got a job out there that you like or a job that they tell them they can call me. Tell them to ask for Counsel Walker. I will give you a good reference while you was in here. If we still have anything left for you, whether you was in food service, whether you were in facilities, whether you were in VT, I will give you a good reference. So that's one thing I can do as a counselor while, I'm still inside and they have been released, that I can definitely give them a reference, be it a reference letter or a reference on the phone. So that's one thing that I do admire doing for them, especially when they were, good offenders when they were in for me. I'll definitely do that.
Thank you. If anyone from the audience has questions for us, please put them in the Q&A. And in the meantime, I'm just going to keep on asking questions, but I'd love to hear what you all might want to ask as well of our panel. Ms. Cody, I'd love to hear a little bit about the clemency process with President Obama, because I understand you got 6 different commutations from President Obama, which is extraordinary. So tell us a little bit about the role that commutations and clemency play in the criminal justice system.
Sure. So commutations are a form of clemency. There are 2 kinds of clemency. There's pardon and commutation. Pardons are for people who are no longer in physical custody, but there's some lingering or collateral consequence of their conviction that is somehow disrupting their life. But I worked and represented people who are in prison asking for commutation, right? So that is the excision of a federal sentence. I think what's interesting about clemency and the reason why I love the work is that there's no formula for it. There are the sentencing guidelines. There's a formula that you have to look at for under statutes. But clemency is just a fancy word for mercy, and it's presidential mercy. And so it's the highest political mercy that we have in this country. And so for someone who's been sentenced to a term of incarceration, and America has said that you don't get to have your freedom for the rest of your life. To represent people and put together their stories and petition for clemency, it's really a petition for mercy. It's very restorative, and connecting to what Counsel Walker said about the work that she's doing, I very much think that as we dismantle mass incarceration, we must move towards restorative justice and repairing. That to me is what decarceration is. It's more than just leaving prison. It's people leaving prison to what? And so I think part of that conversation is definitely about restorative justice and about clemency. So when I started writing clemency petitions, there were plenty of people who said, oh, that's like winning the lottery. It's never going to happen. It's more likely that your clients will get struck by lightning while on the yard at the prison. And I just really felt like there were two things, because I was standing at an intersection. I felt like my clients' stories deserve to be heard and told. And often when you're, sentenced to a mandatory life sentence, the judge can't really listen to your story because they can't do anything about it. And so I felt like their stories deserve to be told. And I felt hopeful that if the president's administration sort of heard the nuances of how people were being sentenced to death in prison, then that's how we move the law forward, right? And so I was just always interested in the places in which people said, oh, the law's never going to change. Like, that's where I want to practice. And so, after that first commutation, what we saw was the Obama administration then set up a whole clemency initiative, right? And invited more petitions to come in. And asking all the right questions, like, what has this person done while they're in prison? Do they have a reentry plan? Are they serving a sentence for which the law has subsequently changed, but not retroactively? And those are all the considerations that I think are necessary in order to undo, fossilized injustice. But I think it starts with going to the highest, places of power and saying, we need to have a conversation about, the law and how it's occurring. So, I think, and one thing I'll say about clemency is it sparks a public conversation, right? Because when someone receives a commutation, it's in the news, and I kept seeing that, Reynolds Wintersmith's case was in the news, and then there were more in the news. And that is how, as a podium lawyer, I can engage in the public conversation about drug policy as well.
Right, because the stories are so compelling. I mean, the idea that Mr. Douglas, who sold a golf ball size amount of crack, was sentenced to die in prison, and the confidential informant who had a long violent history, including murder, got just several years.
Right.
I mean, I think people are shocked by that.
Right.
And it's unfortunate that we're not more aware of how prevalent that disparity is and how the entire federal system is based on cooperation.
Yeah, I think it goes to, this is what we were talking about earlier in some of the three dominant purposes of punishment are incapacitation, deterrence, and retribution, right? And so, one of the things that I hear defenders of the current status quo of mass incarceration say is, people in prison are there because we're all safer, right? So there's this like community safety, public safety component of defending the status quo. But what I know from being a federal defender and being in court every day is that oftentimes the person who has the more egregious criminal history is the one that's chosen and, cooperates, right? And so I think there are many dominant carceral narratives in our current criminal judicial system that we ought to unpack, right? Like, are we really more safe with Mr. Douglas in prison and the cooperating informant who had a history of violence getting a get out of jail free card, right? Are we more safe with people serving life in prison for marijuana while there are marijuana dispensaries that we walk past every day on the way to court? And so I think like those dominant narratives, I would be interested to hear how other like students in the audience, what dominant carceral narratives or dominant myths about the criminal legal system have they heard? Do they think are worth unpacking and talking about in the public square?
Thank you. And one of the questions that we did have in the Q&A is from someone who pointed out that it might not be fair to characterize someone who's dealing drugs as being nonviolent.
Mm-hmm.
So can you address that?
Absolutely. Yeah, I am not a fan of that binary as well, because I don't think it's necessary. I think the question, I understand the implication of the question is whether this person is dangerous today. And logically, people think, well, if you've committed a violent offense in the past, then history is a prologue to the future, right? And so when we talk about nonviolent versus violent, offenders, what we're trying to communicate is this is not a person who we believe is likely to be dangerous. But I do think that, I am the daughter of a person who struggled with addiction. And I know that I've at times felt like whoever sold that drug to my family member committed an aggressive act of violence against my family structure, right? I also know, and this is what Counselor Walker was saying, that the restorative justice and repairing families and repairing communities happens outside of the carceral state, right? And so the work that I do is an act of forgiveness. I'm forgiving the person who I felt like harmed my family. And I think that's the conversation that we ought to be having. How do we create spaces for true nuanced justice that don't, entertain the sort of dichotomies of nonviolent versus violent? So the question is well taken.
Yes, thank you. Another question is, have you seen any prosecutors across the country, given how much power they have in the criminal legal system, who have instituted policies that you think are making steps in the positive direction?
I have. So there's policy and there's practice. And, I was very pleased to see this recent administration reinstitute the DOJ policy to not charge mandatory minimums in 3 strikes cases writ large. The instruction now is to do an individualized assessment in each one of your cases before you file the enhancement and launch people into mandatories. So I think that sort of like DOJ policy is very important. I have cases all over the country. I practice in 16 federal districts and 8 courts of appeal. And so I also see what's happening on the ground level. And I think that some of those disparities are concerning because, a person shouldn't face decades more in prison just by coincidence of geography of where they're prosecuted, right? And so I think I've certainly seen, good apples in the bunch. I've seen bad apples in the bunch. But I think the real justice conversation has got to be about what are the wholesale policies that we are putting in place from the top. And is there a culture of, prosecuting to close cases and get numbers? I think prosecutors face a lot of pressure, right? To just close and prosecute a certain number of cases. That's how we, fund positions in prosecutors' offices. And that system needs to be unpacked and deconstructed.
That's a great idea. Another question that we had is, what do you see coming from the Biden administration in terms of the next level of criminal justice reform? Obviously, President Biden has a lot to make up for his work on the Crime Act in the 1990s.
I think so. This gets into my feelings about reform. I think that reform itself has many flaws. I think if we were, having this conversation, not about criminal justice reform, but about slavery reform or segregation reform, none of us would be saying we want to reform systems that are oppressive. And so my work is to dismantle mass incarceration, not to reform it. And I certainly know that those are the conversations that I'll be having with the Biden administration. And, you know, not sort of like, how can we slow trickle some people out of prison and have a press conference about it, but how can we, you know, roll back mass incarceration until it's dismantled completely and abolished? And what conditions in the community are people returning to, you know? And I go back to where I started with Reynolds Wintersmith, who was my first commutation, who had been thrown away, right? And, you know, but for that clemency, he'd still be there. But today he's a high school guidance counselor on the west side of Chicago, leading restorative justice circles. That would not have happened if he were still in prison. And so I think that what I'm expecting from the Biden administration, I don't know if they're going to produce it, but what I'm expecting is not simply, look, we've let a bunch of people out of prison, but that we fundamentally reconstructed or constructed communities in a way where prison isn't the first system that pays attention to people. You know, we've seen schools defunded, mental health care defunded, healthcare defunded, neighborhoods defunded. And so I want to see people leaving prison plus.
Absolutely. We only have a few minutes left. I want to ask one more question and hopefully get all of your perspectives on it. And that is, what do you think the role of incarceration should be in an ideal criminal legal system, if any?
Yeah, I'll answer, you know. So I was recently asked in like a media interview as a newspaper about, you know, whether I'm a prison abolitionist. And, you know, I think the question is interesting and my answer is very nuanced because I'm certainly a mass incarceration abolitionist. I do think that, and we've all seen, there are people who commit, you know, crimes against individuals, police who commit crimes against individuals who I want to go to prison. So, you know, I'm not a prison abolitionist because I understand that there is a public safety necessity. I do think, you know, going back to what Dr. King said, just build what you put on paper. And so if the goal is public safety and to make us feel safer, then put people in prison to do that. And so I certainly think that, you know, we ought to be thinking about dismantling mass incarceration and abolishing mass incarceration, abolishing, you know, people being put in prison for long sentences for drugs. But I also think the role of incapacitation is one that we need to continue to have a conversation about.
That's a great answer.
It's true.
Mr. Douglas, Ms. Walker?
I have another presentation that I designed called 2035 Corrections Where We Be. And I'm not gonna run into time, and I can tell you another day, Ms. McConnell, about this particular program, but it was in reference to a young man that I met at the institution. He was 22 years old and he told me he had 20 years. And I used to tell him all the time, and he looked at me, I said, you know what? I said, son, you have a baby face. But the day I spoke to him, three things instantly came into my mind. Number one, okay, we have just given him a job in food service. Now he's one of the head cooks at the institution. Number two, where will we be at staff 2035? Because when I asked him, I said, you got 20 years. I said, well, I don't know what you're here for. I said, but when is your release date? He said his release date was 2035. And that instantly made me think that we have a lot of work that we have to do. Number one, this is a 22, 23-year-old young man. You know, he gets out in 2035. You know, where will we be pretty much as a nation, corrections, law enforcement, where will we be to help someone like him? Because he's going to be an older gentleman in 2035, you know, when he gets released. So my main thing is just to continue to have hope. That's one thing my aunt tell me all the time. She said, baby, just keep telling them hope. I say, okay, so that's what we're doing. So we hope that we'll change, the administration to change some things, that we will change. You know, some of us who work in this thing every day, hopefully we will change and we can effectively start changing on the inside out. So hopefully we'll do that. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Douglas, I'd love to hear your answer to that question and also what we could do better to help individuals when they first are released from prison.
Well, just to promote, you know what, when a lot of gentlemen get out and ladies that they don't have a home structure, they don't have no place to go. And that's the first thing that, you know, we should try to help assist them. Cause like 2 of my friends had got out of penitentiary, and I had a friend, I didn't have, but I have a friend, and he owns like a boarding house, you know, so I assist them in moving over there with him, you know, so he allowed them to move in and get them a room, and they doing so good now they got jobs and they comfortable. You know, if you could come home to stableness, you know, you'll feel way better, you know, than, you know, they talk about jobs, but yeah, jobs is right there, but it's second to me. When I came home, I came home to a stable home, and that felt good. So if these guys or ladies could come home to some stable, you know, and then you work on your job, you know, you work on your job or your schooling, you know, and believe me, they'll succeed. And we all the time talk about doing some, but I hate it when we just talk about it. I want to see the do, you know, cause we, you know, a lot of times, you know, it's just hot air, and I don't like it. But that's why I love MiAngel and them ladies, cause they a part of the do. You know, they are.
That's right.
You know, I could go all day, and this young lady here, I love what you doing. You know, and you write about when you in prison, and you know, the guards that I had a quick story. I had one of the guards in jail when I was in Terror Hut, and I was the commissioner of the sports program. And he used to always tell me, he said, Douglas, you know, I love what you're doing, you know, and anything that I could do to assist you, you know, in my powers, you know, I'm here for you. And that's a good thing if you can assist a person that want to do something. If they don't want to do nothing, then you just have to let them go. That's anybody. But if they want to do something, you will see it. Because when my first day in jail, you know, I asked, I say, where do I go to sign up for my GED? You know, I went and signed up for my GED, got my GED. Well, I want an associate. You know, went and signed up for that, got an associate. You know, it's if you want to, I didn't let prison stagnate me. I want to grow, you know, because now I can tell my grandkids, you know, about, yeah, I got my diploma. You know, I could show them.
Yeah. I hope there will come a time when we are certain that everyone who is incarcerated has access to education and to training to make sure that when they get out, they have the skills they need to support themselves.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So our time is up. I can't believe how quickly it went by. It's been an extraordinary conversation. I'm so grateful to all of you. And Mr. Douglas, your willingness to share your story with us, we all learned so much from your words, and listening to the phone call when you found out that you were actually going to be released was such a special thing for you to share with us. So thank you for that.
Yes. 2 years.
Thank you all for your great work.
Thank you.
Thanks for being with us here at the University of Richmond.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Goodbye, everybody.
Good night, everyone.